We've been talking a lot on the show lately about what we can teach each other to do to fight for democracy and in an emboldened second Trump administration. It can feel overwhelming. As Trump has returned to the White House, his allies control both houses of Congress, and the Supreme Court is stacked with a conservative supermajority that was shaped by his own three nominees. But as the saying goes, the only way out is through. So it seems worthwhile to look for advice from folks who have a lot of experience working against the odds, against big majorities and powerful forces, people who've resisted and persisted and learned from each victory and defeat. Which brings us to Tennessee, a deep red state where Republicans control the governorship and both chambers of the legislature. A group of Democratic lawmakers staged a protest on the floor of the state house calling for gun control legislation that their Republican colleagues opposed. They didn't have the votes to pass it themselves, but they had their voices. Republicans then took the extraordinarily rare step of voting to expel two of those Democratic lawmakers from the legislature, Justin Jones and Justin Pearson. They were both reinstated by local government officials, and then they were reelected by their constituents. And they're both still fighting. And one of them joins me now, the Democratic Tennessee State Representative Justin Jones. Welcome back to the show, sir.
Always honored to join you, brother.
I think it's important to remind people of your story, because it's not like you got back in the legislature and you're surrounded by a bunch of friendlies who are high-fiving you for being back. You are still in there. You are still talking about things that are causing you to feel isolated, that are causing you to be ostracized within that environment. But you have that voice, and until they take it from you, you will continue to use it.
I mean, precisely. This is the time where we must remember that democracy requires disruption, that we are facing a desperate despot, a dictator who is seeking to take this nation backwards in our history. But this is not the first time we stood up to those who sought to enact second-class citizenship through racial terror and violence. I mean, in the South, particularly, we had folks, young people, rise up against George Wallace and Bull Connor. And if Donald Trump and Tom Homan want to be the George Wallace and Bull Connor of the 21st century, we have a playbook to defeat them.
Yeah, and that's a good point. A, there's a playbook, and B, our ancestors, whoever you are in America, your ancestors, whether you're an immigrant or you're from this country or your ancestors were enslaved people, no one gave us the permission to say this fight is tough. It's tough, but we're in it.
Exactly. It's tough, but I think, we can judge the effectiveness of our movement by the response of our opponents. Seeing the news last night that the federal government is deploying the National Guard against citizens in this country, and where Hegseth is threatening to send in the Marine Corps, we see that this administration wants people to be afraid to protest, to show up, to hold the line. But that's precisely what we must do in this moment. We must push back, fight back. The majority of protests have been nonviolent. Who has been violent has been the ICE agents, who are a terror organization. Here in Tennessee, we had an organization that also used to wear masks and terrorize people that was founded in our state called the KKK. And that's exactly what ICE is doing, dragging people out in the dark of night, going to workplaces, going to elementary school graduations. They are a violent criminal gang in America, and they will be held accountable, maybe not by this administration, but this administration will not always be in power, because they are a fragile, weak system of governance that is a shame on America. One day the Trump Library is going to be a place that children go to learn what is wrong with America, how we move forward from that history, and what is the promise of America that we must continue to fight for. And his children will be ashamed of him. That's why they're trying to ban books, because they know that they're on the wrong side of history.
So let's talk about, you're right that this is all designed to make people afraid to protest. And it's working with some people. So what do you do? Because you are the definition of, you protested inside an environment where they felt that was contrary to the decorum. I don't remember the language the Tennessee legislature used, but basically they kicked you out for being loud and rowdy, in their opinion. You were kicked out of that environment. You got back. You had an ally, one of your white colleagues who was standing by you. Whether it's allyship or whether it's protest, what does that look like in this moment? What should my viewers be thinking about what they have to do to fight against what they are watching on our screens?
Well, Brother Ali, what we must recognize is that courage can be contagious. The more of us who show up at these ICE hearings where they're kidnapping our neighbors, the more of us who show up as they attack our LGBTQ, community, the more of us who show up at school board meetings, the less fear that we will have, because they cannot arrest all of us. Let's be honest. We study the movements in this nation, the civil rights movement. We study the movements fighting apartheid in South Africa. We study the movements for democracy with the Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta. We saw young people boarding buses facing facing, mob threats during the freedom rides, the more of us who participate in action, the less fear that we'll have. And it's really going to require those of us who have the privilege of citizenship, the privilege to say we're going to stand up and observe and document and hold the line and push back. This administration is a weak administration. They are terrified of the people, rising up like they did in 2020, rising up in people power. And that's the solution, is the more that we push back and say that we're not going to allow you to make us afraid to even speak up, that we're going to put our purpose above our title, that we're going to use whatever tool is at our disposal, whatever workplace, whether we're a police officer who says that I cannot do this anymore, or you're a lawmaker who says I'm going to use my title and show up and conduct oversight at these ICE facilities, or you're a nurse and doctor who say I'm going to help provide medical care to people who are being brutalized by their own police department and National Guard, as we're seeing in Los Angeles. We all have a role to play in this moment, and we'll judge, we'll be judged by how we show up in this time by future generations. So have courage, friends. This administration is not going to be in power forever. Their time, the clock is ticking. Donald Trump is a dying weed, and we know that the people who are flocking to him, we saw how quickly they turned on each other when Elon Musk said that he was on the Epstein list. We see that this is an administration that's going to implode eventually, and we must continue to push back and fight back, and to not be afraid in this moment, but to have courage and solidarity. That's the way forward.
I get why your courage is contagious. It always has been. But you talk about the U.S. Civil Rights Movement. You talk about the anti-apartheid movement. Very similar. There were people who said, I'll be part of the ambulance corps. I'll be there with medical kits. I'll be a medic. I'll make you food. I'll be around the edges. There's some older people. We know that white older people don't get attacked at protests, the way young black people do. So a lot of older people who would go to these rallies and say, almost act as security. We're going to be there to try and stop the cops from being violent. There are things everybody can do that's better, that's bigger than voting. I'm not going to say better, because voting is crucially important, but that's more than voting.
Exactly. I mean, my grandma, I'm so proud of her, was organizing her first protest of retired nurses in our hometown. We're seeing seniors step up. We have a core of grandmothers. You saw one in Tennessee, Lynn McFarland, drug out of our committee room for saying, I cannot cooperate with the system, 8 years old, and saying, I'm not going to leave as you're attacking immigrant kids. There's so many things we can do. Musicians, using your music. What would the anti-apartheid movement, what would the civil rights movement, the anti-Vietnam movement be without music and using that platform? Use your platform. Do not be, afraid of losing proximity to power, but let's build collective power for our people. Let's stand up and fight back and let them know that this administration is not something that we're going to try and build unity with, but we will overthrow them. This is a government that is not of or by or for the people. It's of, by, and for the oligarchs. A greedy administration that has no right to rule this nation, that has only won through voter suppression and gerrymandering in my state. And so just like the George Wallace eventually was taken out of power and had to apologize and had some remorse. I don't know if Donald Trump will ever apologize. I don't know if he has a heart, but this administration is not going to last forever. Our people powered movements are the way forward. And if you study social movements, I'm a political science professor as well, 3.5% of the population, that's, if you study political science, that's how much you need to build a social movement. 3.5%. We can do that. We can do that across this nation, from Nashville to New Hampshire, from California to Arkansas to Louisiana, all across this nation. Let's build a movement together and engage in mass non-cooperation, civil disobedience. Let's enact what Dr. King was calling for in 1968. This is the time. The line has been crossed, and it's time for us to rise up as a generation and let them know that we're not going to allow them to take us backwards in our history to darker days that we don't want to go to.
Brother Jones, that was the B12 shot that democracy needed this morning, and we are grateful to you for it, as always. Justin Jones is the Democratic State Representative of Tennessee. If you don't know his story, I bet you do, but if you don't know his story, you should get to know it, because it's going to make you feel very encouraged about how you fight against, or how you fight to protect democracy.